Welcome to our discussion today on realizing inclusive value. My name is Liz Hyman. I'm the president and CEO of the XR Association. We're a nonprofit trade association representing businesses in the XR ecosystem. And I am really delighted to be the moderator of this panel today. And we wanted to take our time to focus the discussion on how we can make accessibility in virtual, augmented, and mixed reality a smart and attractive investment for developers, manufacturers, customers, everyone. And so fortunately, we have some really wonderful panelists today that bring tremendous background and expertise to this topic. So I wanted to start it off with some brief introductions and ask each of you to say hello to the audience. So Shane, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Liz, and I'm happy to share a bit of information about my background that's most relevant to this discussion. So among other roles, I serve as a senior fellow with G3ICT. G3ICT is a nonprofit organization originally founded to support Article 9 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is on accessibility. And over the past 15 years, the organization has increased its focus to other areas of the CRPD in recognition of the role technology broadly plays in advancing human rights. So through my career, I've done research and advocacy around persons with disabilities and their social and economic inclusion, and worked with members of Congress and their staff on technology and labor policy. And I'm happy to be here with you today.
Why don't you go next, if you don't mind?
Hi, I'm George Corrales, Group Product Manager at Strivr. We're building the enterprise VR platform for immersive learning that has trained almost 1 million people at Fortune 500 companies with VR. In terms of accessibility, I've done research on accessible technology at Cornell University, at University of Washington, and with Microsoft Research. And I've been a champion for accessibility in XR since I started working on XR products about 5 years ago. And previously at Microsoft, now at Strivr.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
George. And Deb, please introduce yourself.
Hey, sure. I'm Deb Mares. I'm Deb Mares 24 at Twitter. I am originally an aging historian, and I became a technologist 5 years ago. I'm mainly involved in virtual and augmented reality for trying to recreate the past. And since then, I've been doing front-end development for the past 3 years, focused on UI and web development. And then I've been involved in accessibility and like WCAG standards for the past 2 years.
Awesome. Okay, so as I said, we have a fantastic panel. I'm going to start the conversation with a little bit of a place setter, if you will. And I think the place to start is, look, we all know and love the gaming side of XR, and undoubtedly this will continue to be a core audience for immersive technologies. But in the last year and a half, I think we've seen some focus brought to sort of the enterprise side of the conversation. And I was struck by a study that I saw. It was a 2020 McKinsey global survey of executives that in the wake of COVID, it was looking at companies and determining that they have accelerated digitization generally of their customer and supply chain interactions and of their internal operations by 3 to 4 years. And the share of digital or digitally enabled products in their portfolios has accelerated by an unbelievable 7 years. So we've seen an incredible move towards digitalization in light of COVID. And more, I think we're seeing that that is relevant to XR and that will be part of this digitalization trend. And so this kind of lined up with a study that the XR Association did. It's about a year old. And it was entitled A New Reality in Immersive Technology, Insights and Industry Trends. And what we were trying to do is to benchmark the growth and adoption of XR technology among enterprise users across 6 key industry segments: health, education, manufacturing, retail, public safety, and job training. And so I wanted to share just a couple of high-level results from that survey that I thought might be relevant to our conversation here today. So the first takeaway is that the level of knowledge among leaders in these fields is really pretty good when it comes to XR. 75% of the respondents had heard of XR, and 94% thought that XR could be useful in terms of applications to its business. And the second takeaway that I wanted to share, and I think it's pretty notable, is that 3 in 4 leaders expect to invest more money, more resources into XR in the coming 5 years. And that was pretty healthy across all of the different groups. It was like 75 to 85% roughly, which is a good number, and particularly strong in manufacturing, job training, retail, and healthcare. We also wanted to take a look at how COVID might specifically impact the adoption of XR. And really all sectors felt that XR had a role to play in their recovery for post-pandemic efforts. And it was particularly so with the case of immersive training and learning outcomes and enabling better communication and collaboration. Those were the leading areas where they thought XR could be particularly impactful and help their industry recover from the effects of COVID. So look, if these trends hold steady, and I believe they will, I think it becomes even more important that we work, today to ensure that this technology is accessible and that it's baked in from the start. So with that as sort of, as I said, a place setting for our conversation, I wanted to ask a few questions. And so I'm going to start with Shane. Shane, you mentioned your work with the G3ICT, and I'm just curious, how does that work inform your opinion of how we go about making the business case for accessible XR? And do we need to flip the way we approach tech and accessibility from what we can't do to what we can do?
Thank you, Liz. Well, many of us involved with research on the economic and social inclusion of persons with disabilities have tended to lean on this vicious cycle of stigma and discrimination, un- and underemployment, and poverty and isolation. We also tend to focus on issues of regulatory compliance and social responsibility and other tactics that are generally based on fear or compelling someone to do the right thing. After several decades, the numbers on poverty, educational attainment, and employment have not shown significant improvement, and people generally seem overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem. And although they recognize that the problems exist, they seem daunting and unsolvable. So instead, we should reframe the problem space to focus on a virtuous cycle of recognized value, investment, and greater inclusion. Turning a negative into a positive is by no means a novel concept, but it is an approach that I know that I have tended to ignore in my work. This reframing can be applied to any situation. In this case, we're talking about the business case for accessible XR, and as we describe the cycle, the language should appeal to the audience we're trying to reach. So from a business orientation, a virtuous cycle for accessible XR should start with the recognition that persons with disabilities are consumers of technology products and services. And when technology is more accessible and usable, it appeals to the disability community while simultaneously reaching a broader market. Therefore, this recognized market value should drive investment to overcome the issues with accessibility and usability, leading to increased demand across demographics, which drives profits and perpetuates the cycle. We could apply the same thinking to accessible XR and the expansion of remote working and telepresence. Here, we know that the broader acceptance for new ways to engage with work is not in itself a game changer for persons with disabilities. This is because the issues of accessibility, affordability, connectivity, and usability of tech that existed well before the pandemic are still real barriers. But if the business community recognizes the inherent value that persons with disabilities represent to the workforce, then this could drive investment to address these persistent issues. The increased investment will produce more inclusive technology, to include XR, which will enable more remote work and telepresence opportunities. The combination of more inclusive tech and reduced barriers to entry could benefit persons with disabilities through increased employment and career advancement. At the same time, businesses benefit from greater diversity in their workforce and new perspectives to drive innovation in their products and services. The combination of those purposeful actions and resulting outcomes create benefit for the economy and society. So the virtuous cycle approach is action-oriented. There's a relationship between practical action and tangible desired outcomes rather than a focus on preventing major societal problems. So taking this approach may prove to be more influential in the behavior of the audiences that we hope to influence. And this is well in keeping with the spirit of the work that we do at G3ICT.
Great. And I love, flipping the frame and having a more positive and inclusive way of thinking about this. And so, Deb, as a software engineer, as an evangelist for all things XR, I know you've thought, you've written, you've advocated for the growth of immersive tech. And I know, among other things, you've really given a lot of focus and thought to enterprise use cases and collaboration, communication, and training. Thinking a little bit about what Shane just talked about, this sort of more positive frame for how we move forward. I wanted to focus for a moment on these types of tools, the collaboration, communication, and training tools, and what you think that can be done to encourage inclusion at the get-go of our XR digital revolution.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that right now is a great time to be thinking about inclusion from the start. Accessibility is getting a lot more traction, whether it's from people with disabilities, advocacy groups, people realizing that it's the right thing to do, or even from lawsuits. People are becoming more aware about accessibility, and it's a bigger topic now than it's ever been before. So to encourage inclusion in XR, really what we need to do is have those standards and guidelines in place. So before we even start designing an XR experience, we need to have those expectations of what people need to do and what they need to think about to make an experience accessible. So I think really the best way to do this is to hear from people with disabilities. And I'm sure this point is going to be brought up multiple times during the XR Access Symposium, is that really we need to include people with disabilities throughout the entire software development lifecycle. From the hardware side, making the headsets, the controllers, to the software side of hand tracking assistive technologies inside of the device and individual applications on top of that. So we really need to hear from people with disabilities and make that part of the process. We need to do user testing. We need to include people with disabilities in user testing. And then when we get into development, we really need to have like accessible guidelines to say, when I develop something, I have a bunch of things that I need to check the box on. So just making accessibility part of that is going to be really key. And then, of course, when we're thinking about like testing, making sure that we're doing manual testing with different assistive technologies, and then really getting that buy-in from senior leadership. So if you're in a larger corporation, that buy-in from senior leadership is going to be really key because that's one of those drivers that's going to help you fund and get the buy-in you need from your teammates and members as well. So not only do we need to start from the grassroots and having each person in their individual roles know what to do to be accessible, we also need to have that senior buy-in.
Deb, those are great points. And George, I think they probably resonate with you and the world that you come from. And as you mentioned, Strivr is one of the leading enterprise solution providers for immersive learning and job training. And at the beginning of this, I referenced a McKinsey study about the acceleration of digitalization due to COVID. And I guess what I was curious about is what you're seeing in your space in this training and immersive learning space, in terms of how we're doing in terms of baking in some of the accessibility features from the get-go.
Yeah, I think the industry is in a different place than it was a few years ago, and there's enough evidence now that XR tech, especially for learning and development, can have a huge ROI for organizations. And so I definitely think we're at the right point to be baking accessibility into this technology, because more organizations are passing the point of running a pilot or doing an innovation project, and actually now are looking to build XR infrastructure that will scale across their organizations and have big impact on workforce development and actually meeting business objectives with this technology. And COVID might have accelerated that, but I think that was already a trend that was happening. So with that in mind, accessibility is critical, because if you're an organization looking for workforce transformation, you have to think about your employees with disabilities. And if you're implementing accessible XR solutions, it means you can capture that value over your entire workforce. It means you don't have to implement and build different technical solutions for different groups of employees. But really most important, if you don't have accessible XR solutions, you're excluding disabilities, an already disadvantaged group, from the tools that are going to make them most successful on the job. So I think because XR tech is scaling up and it's happening now, I definitely think it's the right time for XR providers to be building that technology in, and also for the buyers of XR to push the providers too.
Terrific points. And, I think it sort of is a good segue into sort of another area that I wanted to explore. And you had made this comment when we were preparing for this panel, and it made me really give some thought to this. You suggested that we should think about not just the responsibilities of the developers and the technologists to figure out what accessibility should look like in XR, but we also need to consider what the responsibility is of the customer. And so, I guess, George, just to follow up, are customers doing a good enough job of setting expectations that accessibility is necessary so that it kind of pumps the rest of the value chain here? And if not, how do you I think we need to go about showing them the value lost if they don't set those expectations?
Yeah, in my experience with Strivr, talking with Fortune 500 companies, I'm hearing more customers asking about the accessibility of our platform and product. So I find that encouraging. And I think it goes back to the fact that this technology is at a point now where it's scaling and it's becoming part of the IT infrastructure of large organizations. And so we obviously still have a ton of work to do to figure out how to make this technology accessible. But because it is scaling, I think it is the right time for organizations to start setting the same expectations around accessibility that they would for other types of IT infrastructure that they would want to deploy across their whole organization. So for any like XR customers that are listening, whether you're sourcing hardware or software or services, definitely ask your providers and vendors what they're doing with accessibility and kind of the actions they're taking. And last point on this topic, the solution is not falling back to 2D screens, because I think the reason we're here and the reason we're excited about XR technology is because it's a fundamentally new and differentiated medium that can do things that no other medium can. And it's our responsibility to make sure that everybody has access to those new opportunities.
Yeah, I think we can all safely agree that we're all believers in this becoming the next computing platform. You know, that it's not just a nice to have, it's going to be a must have. So I like that you're calling that out. And Deb, you know, are there enough tools and guides and materials out there to help developers, to help others realize their responsibility for accessible XR, and what might be missing?
So frankly, no. But I do think we are starting to get there. I mean, I know Oculus has those 9 virtual reality checks, but all 9 of those for accessibility are as nice to have and not required. And then, of course, the XR Association does have the developer checklist, which you know all about. And then we have the W3C who's creating things. But still fundamentally, like one of the things that I've been working on recently has been WebXR. And you would think, well, we have the WCAG, we have all these standards in place for WebXR, but at its fundamental, 3D models don't have an alt tag. So that's not going to work with a screen reader, or someone who's a screen reader user isn't going to know what's inside of that 3D scene. So we really need to start working from that side as well, just getting that semantic HTML or getting the semantics inside of Unity, Unreal, be able to actually just think about how is this going to interact with different tools. So I think really just getting those checklists and trying to figure out, okay, we really need the semantic HTML for WebXR. What can we do? What needs to be the next step? And then when you give it to developers, say, okay, we have the semantic HTML. Here's what you need to do. And here's what designers need to do, and here's what testers need to do. Just getting everyone to be able to know these are the roles, and just making it part of the software development lifecycle instead of an add-on, like kind of what we have now.
Yeah, and I will say, just in reference to our own set of guidelines, we've always said these are living, breathing. It's a living, breathing document, right? It starts, and then we need to keep improving and adding on to it as we go along. Whether it's the XR Association or the Oculus checklist, WC3, all the groups that you talked about, and I am very encouraged that there's a real momentum to keep that conversation moving forward. So, but you're right, we need everybody pitching in for sure. Shane, I wanted to continue on this theme of shared responsibility. And talk a little bit about telework tools more specifically, and how accessible how do we connect people of all abilities to see their commonalities and move the accessibility dialogue forward so that it's inclusive and it benefits us all?
So I'd like to build on the great comments that Deb and George have both made, both in the leadership of their organizations and individually. So it's about leadership, right? So along with G3ICT, there are many other notable groups that have done great work to demonstrate the broad societal value of accessibility in a generalized sense. And there are toolkits and success stories and research available on topic. But in my experience, the stumbling block continues to be the broad recognition of value embodied in the disability community, right? There's so much perception of difference and dwelling on difference in a negative sense, rather than in the positive sense of diversity and innovation and some of the virtues that come along with perceived or real differences. So we have an opportunity, right? We have an opportunity to advance these years of advocacy and the creation of landmark federal and international policy models around the inclusion of persons with disabilities. We have the experience of the past year with the pandemic, which in many cases have shown us just how similar we are as people. Going through the shared experience and all of the concerns we all have had for just basic human needs over the past year. And so kind of circling back to this theme of responsibility, there's leadership required within the industry, right, to help advance those conversations, to build on the work that has been done and not to allow us to sort of retrench or regress or view persons with disabilities as an afterthought in the conception of these technologies and how they are designed and how they are deployed and who benefits from them. And telepresence and telework is just a microcosm of that, right? It's a tangible way to anchor to this topic because employment is, a predictor of other sort of benefits that someone might experience in their life. So we can focus there, right? We can focus the case studies and we can focus the technologies that relate to that, but it should be in the service of the broader societal conversation of what that really means by having persons with disabilities in the thought process, included in the conversations, and leadership demonstrated by the industry to make sure that that happens.
Well, so just thinking a little bit more about the sort of ecosystem here, there was something, George, that you mentioned that we're moving past the point of pilots and that we're getting into, sort of full-blown solutions. And clearly there's demand for that, right? So I feel like we're at a different inflection point. If you think about, how things might have played out, for example, with mobile technology and accessibility, there was a lot to learn in that conversation from beginning to end. In this instance, it feels like we've flipped it a little bit, that there is broad recognition that accessibility and inclusivity has to be at the beginning of the conversation, not at the end. And so I'm curious, when you commented about getting past sort of the pilot stage, is there something you're seeing there that reinforces what I just said, that we're a bit of a flipped paradigm?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what it takes to deploy any kind of technology across a large organization and make it part of IT infrastructure. And, when we work with large organizations like Walmart or FedEx or Verizon, we have to go through these huge compliance reviews. And any software company or tech company would have to go through those types of reviews. And it's a little bit different when we're talking about a new technology like XR. But even if it's a new technology, if it's going to scale across that entire organization, there's requirements that need to be met. We might need to meet them in a different way than we meet them for traditional media, but organizations are already thinking about that because it's part of the existing compliance processes they have, and they're thinking about their employees with disabilities.
And I'm curious, Shane, that's a great explanation of how larger corporations function, but when you get into smaller businesses, they may not have the same sort of compliance mechanisms, or they might, I don't know. But in your experience, is there a different conversation with smaller organizations and what they need to bring to the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because there's different scales of economic pressures, right? That you would be facing. A very large organization that has a lot of operating capital, that has a lot of presence throughout the world, right? They feel economic fluctuations differently than a small business in, your local town. And a small business in your local town might not be predisposed to this conversation around accessibility and what does it mean to make our products and services, our store accessible, our web presence accessible, those sorts of things. And I think it becomes, part of the demonstration of new normative behaviors through the business community, through societal expectations that kind of model that out, so that a small business owner could see that they are actually foregoing a lot by not thinking about those things. But they have to be exposed to it, and I think you have to meet people where they are in those conversations too, right? Because for them at the end of the day, it's like, what do I do to keep my lights on in the midst of a recession? And I know that I have regulatory compliance things that I have to consider just by virtue of my built environment or other things. But what does that mean in terms of driving value for my business? Help me to understand that. So I think it's more of bringing that conversation to their level of readiness to engage on it.
Yeah, and I think that imbues the conversation that we've been having with the XR Access Initiative, and particularly around this conversation of business cases and how we make this attractive, no matter what the size or audience might be. So Deb, I'm going to give you the last sort of pitch down the middle, which is, thinking about the XR Access Initiative and the business case work stream. Having listened to this conversation, where are you hoping that conversation's going to go? What are we drawing from today that is going to be a necessity that we work on?
I really hope what we can do in the future for the business case workstream is really, how can I, as an individual, say an individual developer at X company, drive this sort of inclusion, and how can I get buy-in from senior leadership, or how much money is it going to save me? What sort of use case do I need to put together? And then, if we're looking at what Shane's saying with the economics, and I don't understand all of that because I'm not a math person, but just being able to put all of that together so that way someone from any company can come in and say, oh, it's all packaged for me. I have what I need to pitch. I have everything I need. Let's go ahead and get forward with it.
Well, if that's not a call to action for the XR Access community, I don't know what is. And I want to really encourage people to get involved with XR Access, to get involved with our work stream, and contribute to that conversation, because we have a lot of work to do for sure. There's a lot of progress, but there's a lot of work to do. So I think now we're ready to take some questions from the audience, and we're really grateful for the time today.
Thank you so much, Liz, Shane, George, and Deb. That was such a great discussion. So as a reminder, you can post questions to the panelists in the Topic Business channel on Slack. So I'm going to send our first question to Deb, because it sounds like you might have some personal experience within this area, but it would be great to hear from others on this as well. So Deb, you mentioned the importance of getting buy-in from senior leadership on making technology accessible. If you're willing to say, can you talk a little bit more about what those getting buy-in conversations have looked like for you? And can you offer the rest of us any tips on how to make those conversations successful?
Yeah, so I've been doing XR work in enterprises for the past 3 years. And almost every conversation I've had has been really figuring out, number one, how much is it going to cost? Number two, why are we going to do this? Or is there a big driver? And then the third one is really just trying to pitch to the ethos of people, right? Saying, okay, make sure that we know who our users are and why they need this and why it's important. So I really think that's always just been kind of difficult to pitch, is trying to figure out, okay, how can we balance the accessibility with all the other fighting priorities that we have.
I wonder also, maybe I can jump in some of our conversations in the business case workstream, we've been talking about what is the cost of not making a product accessible. And we've talked a little bit, there's some analogies. For example, IBM and their research group did a pretty exhaustive study about what is the cost of bugs that are not fixed. And in some ways, if we could adapt that conversation to talk about the lack, of inclusive and accessible features, that would be a very compelling argument to the C-suites and others that they're leaving money on the table by not pursuing inclusive and accessible products.
Thank you, Liz. So our next question comes from Scott on Slack. I'm going to send this one to Liz as well. Maybe others can comment. So he says that cognitive accessibility continues to be underemphasized when compared to sensory and physical accessibility. So how can businesses and developers and others increase the focus on cognitive accessibility of XR in workplace technology?
Well, thank you, Scott. That's a great question. And I want to refer people back to the XR Association's Developers Guide. It was mentioned in the previous panel, and it's a set of guidelines of best practices for developers. And we very specifically call out several different concepts and ideas to address cognitive disabilities. And I think, part of this is making sure that at every instance when we're talking about how to make products more accessible, we're thinking about the panoply of users and what their needs and interests are. So that's one place to start. But I also think that some of the work experience, and that's what we're really trying to focus on most recently, is, what's the new work paradigm? How does XR fit into that? And when we think of people with cognitive disabilities, the fact that you can have an in situ assistance to help a worker who's otherwise, profoundly capable of doing the job, but may need one little piece of an overlay in augmented reality or mixed reality or a real-time assist to make that job even better. I think those are the opportunities and possibilities that we're seeing, but maybe some of our other panelists would like to add into that.
Yeah, I could jump in on that one too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, thank you, George. Yeah, this is Shane. One thing I just wanted to relate from that general point, right? It's about context and people understanding where the technology world is and where companies are in their conception of who is in the disability community and what that means. And a lot of exposure over time has been to people with, physical impacts of disabilities, people with who experience blindness or low vision, people who may be deaf or hard of hearing. Cognitive disabilities, the complexity of that is inherently more challenging because there has been less focus on it to start to parse out how do we actually create technology interventions that make a significant difference. And I guess the argument would be, is you're looking at use cases and you're looking at user groups, those who experience the greatest barriers to inclusion, which arguably would be persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the United States, if you're looking at a domestic context, if you focus on technology that starts to address those barriers, I would argue that you would accelerate the advancement of all of these benefits for everyone more significantly, because you're focusing on those who experience the greatest barriers inherently.
George,
Yeah, I was going to jump. Yes, thank you. I was going to hop on to what Liz was saying in terms of employee and workforce development. It's hard to know whether somebody who isn't successful on the job wasn't because they couldn't do the job or wasn't because they weren't properly trained or didn't get the support they need. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity with XR because the training can be a lot closer in terms of the experience and in terms of how you learn to what the job would actually be. And so maybe somebody can't learn in the same way with a manual as they can in a virtual environment that's actually simulating the on-the-job experience. And then with augmented mixed reality, you can actually provide support directly on the job in the context of work, which is really exciting. And so in addition to making these technologies accessible so that people with disabilities have the same level of access as somebody without, actually providing brand new opportunities to support people is something that's very exciting too.
Great, thank you all.
I wanted to just add one more thing. I really think doing the user research will be very helpful in that aspect, because we don't really know what users need or what will help users or just what sort of things. So I think that's really going to be a big driver of that as well.
Great, thank you. So this next question comes from Bill on Slack. So I'm going to send it to Shane first, but I would love to hear from all of you if you have input. So for companies building XR technologies, what resources could the XR Access Initiative create that would help you grow internal interest and implement inclusive design in your products?
Yeah, so it's a great question. This is Shane. I think it starts from really getting a landscape sort of assessment of who are the decision makers, the critical decision makers in that process, and what is most kind of compelling for them in terms of how they would act, how they would respond to information. And we could create, through XR Access, we could create volumes and volumes of what we would believe to be very useful pieces of information to help guide people's behaviors. But it starts with engaging with them up front to find out what they need, right? What are the economic examples that we need to demonstrate? What are the very sort of implementable, practical things that they could do as a starting point that have an amplified impact, right, as they go through and actually put them into practice. But with anything, I think you need to start with talking to the audience to understand what exactly they need, or at least what they think that they need, in order to help in that process.
This is Deb. Go ahead, Liz.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I think one of the things I would love to see coming out of XR Access would really be real life experience of people with disabilities, to say, hey, here's how I use my Quest, and here are the issues I'm facing, and this is why it's really important to have.
And I was just going to add, I have the privilege of leading the business case work stream for XR Access Initiative. And one of the things that we are focused on, and I may end up repeating myself tomorrow, but we want to try and really focus in on a very hyper-specific use case where we can bring in what Deb and Shane were just talking about. We want something that's sort of real life, real time, that is on a timeline, where we can learn a little bit more about what are those drivers, how do we create resources that will address that. So all of this to say, it's a bit of an advertisement for joining the BC XR work stream. We need all the brain power and imagination and expertise we can get in that discussion.
All right. So we have time for one more quick question. I'll send this one to Liz first, but would love to get other opinions. Can you talk more about the kind of competitive advantage that goes to the first company to nail accessible social XR?
That's a great question. And, I'm really proud to represent an organization, the XR Access, the XR Association, we're combining those today, which has fabulous companies, headset manufacturers, and technology platforms. And I think all of them have embraced the notion that inclusive design and accessibility is important and is a competitive advantage. And I think that that drives their desire to build the accessibility guide and to be front and center in starting to see some very exciting prototypes that are coming out, really community developers community, because they do perceive that competitive advantage. But let me share that question with others on the panel.
I could hop in there. This is George. I was talking before about the fact that XR is really scaling and becoming a key part of business, and it's really transforming workforces and companies. And the first and most able platform out there, the products out there that are able to reach the most employees are going to be the most competitive, because companies, businesses are evaluating different technologies. And if one of them is accessible and another is not, it makes that choice a lot easier. And so I think the first platforms, the first products, the first service providers that are able to be accessible and reach the broadest audiences are going to be successful.
This is Shane. I would just add on that, being at the leading edge or the bleeding edge of new technology, right? That's inherently kind of scary territory sometimes, because you are breaking new ground and you are learning by failing and going through that process. But if you are, as a company, intentionally setting forward to crack the code, as you kind of frame the question, and to be the first mover in really making significant advances there, there is certainly the business benefit that comes to that, but it's also in this larger sort of shared community of knowledge and helping to take positive steps forward on inclusion for everyone through that. Right, so there's a broader contribution, and I know I come to this in a lot of ways from a very nonprofit sort of orientation, but I look at what is the broader value of what's being created, even through mistakes. You've learned something that you can share that knowledge with other people, and they can continue to advance on those ideas. And I think there's so many examples of where that has happened in history. This is just this next wave of that technological innovation that could really unlock opportunity for people if we do so in a very purposeful way.
Wonderful. So that is all the time that we have for questions. And we're going to move into a 30-minute break. We'll return at 1:40 with the panel on research in accessible XR.